Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to yet another painting lesson. Here today, we are going to be crafting a beautiful landscape with acrylic paints. This will be a step-by-step tutorial, and as you can see here, we do have a beautifully detailed reference photo to work off of. This is from Pixels. I will link it down below, but we have some wonderfully detailed trees, some light moving through them. You have a lot of depth, and I'm very excited to paint this because when I look out my window for the first time this year, I can see green on the trees, and I always find it so inspiring when the seasons do change. I always love to celebrate spring and summer with a painting, and I think this one really captures the feeling of it. So with that, again, we're going to walk you through this. We're going to make it a nice step-by-step, easy to follow tutorial. I am going to walk you through all of my materials, as I do have my brushes as well as my acrylic paints here. We do have a little bit of water off to the side. We are going to be using that to thin our pigments, which should do a couple of things. One, it should keep the paint wet longer. That's a question I get all the time. How do I keep my paint from drying on the canvas? And often the answer is quite simply, I just use a good amount of water. That said, it's also great because it allows you to thin your pigments, so you can use semi-transparent layers. It helps with dry time, blends, just such a fantastic additional free medium, you know. That said, we're also working with 5 brushes. Here I have a 1-inch flat-headed brush. This is fantastic for blocking in your backgrounds, making sure that you have nice, thick, detailed applications, at least later on. If you want to build the details, you need those nice, good applications underneath, and that's what that's for. We also have a nice fan brush. This is a stiff bristled, and this is great for tapping on little textures and details. Now, this is something that you can make wet, damp. It'll condense a lot of the bristles and you get more of a forking effect. So rather than rendering, 20, 30 impressions, you'll be rendering 4 or 5, and that can be quite useful, but we'll talk about that more later. This is just great for your details. Additionally, we have a liner brush for our more intentional details, and this one, once we make it wet, it will condense those bristles. It'll be even sharper. However, when you want the really, really sharp applications, nothing is going to do the job like this brush, because you are working with individual bristles, where this is a collection of them. Though this is still great, as it does let you work with real intentionality. Now, as for our other brushes, we actually have 2 smaller flatheads. This one, very much akin to this in shape. However, as you can see, very intuitively, it's tinier, which makes it great for the smaller trees. I love having brushes with very nice sharp edges for my subjects with sharp edges. And it's also great for blocking them in because you can still hold a good amount of paint. Finally, we have another small flathead brush, though we're going to use this one for a very different reason. This one right here is about a decade old, and I always just peel the bristles back so that I get a very disheveled look, a very randomized assortment of bristles. That way I can go in with a tapping feature, and that's going to render a lot of randomization, which is going to look quite natural. So this is fantastic, though we use it for a very different purpose than our other smaller flat-headed brush. And these two accomplish quite similar things, though this adds an extra level of randomization. This allows you to be a bit more intentional, incorporate some line work with your taps. We'll talk about all of that in the actual painting lesson, but that is the gist of it. As for the actual pigments, down here at the bottom, we have a titanium white, a green gold, cerulean blue, though I did consider working with an ultramarine. I just love the way an ultramarine blue looks. However, we are doing a summer painting. I think cerulean blue often makes a better color for the sky in those bright summery days. And so we're opting for the cerulean. We also have a burnt umber and an oxide black as well to round it all out. I think this will be the entirety of our palette. If I add anything, I will let you know along the way, but this should do it. As for the actual canvas here, this is an 8 by 10 inch canvas. You are more than welcome to work on anything larger or smaller. Just recognize the larger you go, the longer it'll take, though the more detail you will be able to incorporate. Now, It's also worth noting, we do have a sketch here already on the canvas. If you follow me up over on Patreon, you have already seen that I posted the traceable for this. So if you are somebody who struggles with the drawing process, if you love painting, but you feel like your drawings, your scale are sometimes a bit off and therefore the painting doesn't turn out the way you want it to, up there you can get the traceable. In addition to that, there is a real-time drawing video where I'm actually sketching this out step by step. So if that's something that interests you, if you'd like the drawing lesson as well, it's also up there. Today it is a painting lesson, however, so we are going to get to painting. Now, again, I love doing these acrylic paintings. I think it's really important that we start in the background of them and then we work our way forward. We typically layer it that way. That way we're not having to work very sharp details in the foreground around backgrounds or backgrounds around very detailed foregrounds. I want to be able to layer my midground on top of my background, my foreground on top of my midground. It just looks so much more natural when you do it that way. It allows you to incorporate more detail. So we're going to stop and we're going to start at the top and we're going to work our way down and into this. Now, because we are starting in the background, because we are blocking things in, we are going to begin with the 1-inch flat-headed brush. I love this brush for starting paintings. I have probably, close to 500, if not more, lessons on the channel, and most of them start with this exact brush. Now, I am going to, as noted, dip the bottom third of it into a little bit of water, wipe off the excess. You want the brush to be damp but not wet, because if you make it wet, it'll thin the pigment so much that you won't get a thick application, and it might actually rip off the canvas. However, you do want some water on it because it is going to extend the wet life of this. It is going to help the blend. It's all about finding the right balance. And for me, again, I find I dip it in here a couple of times. I wipe off the excess and all of a sudden, this is perfect. Now I'm going to move these to the side because I do want that area to mix my paint. And again, because we're starting up here, because we can see in the reference photo that it's really quite bright towards the top, we are going to grab an abundance of titanium white. We're going to grab just a hint of cerulean blue, and I do mean a hint, so that right there is honestly quite a bit. I'm going to double down yet again on the titanium white. We can also add the smallest hint of an oxide black. When I'm grabbing just a little bit of a pigment, I typically only use the corner of my brush, and this right here is great. Now, I'm going to head into the top. I typically like to apply my paint, as you can see, with an X-shaped pattern. This is just going to move paint not only left and right, but also up and down. We want a nice thick base. I'm going to go over it a couple of times. This means that sometimes I will cover my drawing, and that is a-okay. We can always go back and resketch it, especially with access to the traceable. You can also, of course, just go back to the start of the video and look at that. But that's how we begin, nice and easy. Now I'm going to grab some extra titanium white, make it a little bit brighter, work that towards the very top and right-hand side. That way we have an incredibly subtle gradient, but one in which you can barely notice. It almost looks like a white, and it's meant to. You'll see the color more later once we get the actual white off the canvas, and we have that direct comparison gone. That said, as we move this way, we're going to move into more of the cerulean blue in the distance. So I'm going to grab some of my cerulean blue. I'm going to work that over here. I'm going to grab a hint of our green gold, just a hint. We want this to be more of a blue mix at this point, and we want to desaturate it as well. So a little bit of oxide black to work in there. That'll mix with the titanium white in the mix. It'll render us more of a gray, and that's actually a beautiful color right there. I'm just mixing it well so that I don't get an abundance of green in a stroke or an abundance of blue. I want it to be nice and reliable. So we'll start applying that right down here. As you can see, you have a lot of trees in this area. There we go. Just like that. Again, nice and easy to begin with. Now, as for the top, for the transition, you know what? Not quite yet. We're going to continue this. We're going to make it more green. The more we move this way, the closer we get to us, and therefore the more green we interject. Also going to interject a little bit more Oxide Black because I don't want it to be too saturated or too bright in the background. We want it to feel a little more gray. I'm going to mix this right beside our blue, that way I know what we're transitioning into and working with. We still want it to be a nice light value, and this is probably pretty ideal. So I'm just going to work this initially right beside it, and then again, X-shaped pattern, we're going to move one into the other. I'm just going to let it get lost, like so. Quite pretty. Now I think we go in with a little bit more of that blue, especially towards the top where it's brighter, making a more diverse, interesting color. And then back here we want it to be a little bit darker, so we're going to interject more of our green gold, a little bit more of our Oxide Black. You can see that we're slowly transitioning this to something a little bit darker, a little more saturated even. A little more rich. Rich is a good word for it. There we go. Place that right there. Now this is pretty thin because I have less titanium white and Oxide Black in it. I want to create a good transition. So I'm going to just add a bit more white and black into this. That's actually far better. I like that a lot more. Work that through here. And we'll blend those together. Now we'll continue moving this way. Get a little bit more Oxide Black in that mix. Darker, darker, darker. But not actually dark. We're saving that for the foreground and such. So, there we go. We have a background. It's nice, it's simple, it's clean, it's a gradient. Moves from a blue into a green, into a darker green. And the actual brush strokes don't matter that much. You can try to make them smooth. I actually want to leave a little bit of brush texture in here because I think it can look really nice in the long term, and I want the base of it to be a little bit more green as a whole. So you can see I'm taking this darker pigment this way, but just at the bottom, because the top here will get more light, it'll have more atmospheric light, it'll have more blue from the sky reflecting on it, but the bottom, you get a little more of a shadow, it's a little bit more green. Now at this point, we're going to hope this is all still a little bit damp, and we're going to grab our disheveled flat-headed brush. We're going to tap this right here, and as you can see, despite the fact that we put it on probably 8 minutes ago, we are able to move that pigment around quite well. And I'm just tapping it up into the sky, giving us a more organic looking edge. And you can see that I started down here and I worked my way this way very intentionally. I didn't want to take the green and then move it back into the blue. That said, you can see this little bristle came off my brush in the taps. That does happen sometimes. And a big pro tip is to not try to pick the bristle up with your hands. You want to scoop it up with your brush like that, and then you take it off from there. But the whole idea there is you don't want your fingerprint on the canvas. It's a lot harder to work off than just a little bit of a brush stroke, right? Now we want more texture in this, which is not going to be hard to achieve. We can either wash this, though if we do, we'll have to dry it perfectly because we don't want our bristles to condense in the water. We want these to remain nice and sharp. Now I don't think I'm going to be able to, maybe I will. But let's actually incorporate a fun little challenge here. I'm going to make a darker version of this to try to incorporate a shadow at the bottom. And we're going to move that up this way, allow it to dissipate towards the light, but I want to apply it enlarge via tap. So we're going to try and do this in time while that still remains dry. Well, this can be dry, it can be wet. I kind of want it somewhere in the middle. But we're going to make a darker version of what we have here, more Oxide Black, very simply. We don't want this to be too dark. We want to save those really dark values for our foreground a little bit later on. But for now, we're going to try this. Whoa, wow, that's nice. That's really nice. It's subtle enough. It's darker. You can see that as we apply this, I'm leaving little openings. That way we have some detail and texture in the gradient. But the gradient is still prevalent, we can still see it. That said, something I want to make sure that you can still see is the actual canvas piece. As you can tell, it's getting a little bit darker out here. There we go, much better. Now again, we're going in, we're tapping. I'm never applying a lot of pressure. I'm also rotating my brush in between a lot of my taps. That way my taps are continuously different from what they were. Grab a little bit more. There we go. That's nice. That's really nice. It's soft, it's kind of misty in the background. When I have new pigment on my brush, I'm probably going to put it over on this side of the canvas. And then when it starts to dissipate, then maybe I'll move it over here. But I try to get the majority of it off in this area that's already a little bit darker, because I want the applications over here to be much more subtle. I still want them, but I want just hints of them. Like that. Again, we'll grab more. It's likely we'll have to mix more, so we might as well just do that now. We were able to beat the dry time on this brush. By continuously going back into the paint, we're making the bristles wet time and time again. So I'm not worried about the dry time at this point because we're using it. So as soon as this is done, I'm going to make sure this brush is nice, cleaned, well taken care of. You can also have some areas, specifically in the foreground here, or at least the area on the left that's closest to us, that there are some darker areas, there's some more patchy areas. That'll just make it look like there are some deeper shadows, because right now what we're really rendering is the impression, the implication of leaves in the distance, right? Nice little soft leaves in the distance that don't have any light. There's essentially foliage on top, it's creating shadows, and there we go. There we go. I like that. Beautiful. Again, very simple, but meant to be at this point. Now we're going to let this get some water. I'm really scrubbing it at the bottom. Typically that can be damaging to the bristles, but I'm actually great with that happening with this one because I like this brush to be more disheveled and broken up. So I'm going to let this dry fully. I'll try to take as much water as I can off on the cloth over here, but again, we're going to let this dry before we really proceed with it. And now, let's do a little zoom out. I think at this point, what we want to do is we want to start reincorporating some little bits of sky in this before we start building our real leaves, our foreground, our tree branches, because there's going to be openings within this foliage where you do get to see the sky. And right now is the easiest time to put it in because we want to layer other things over top of it rather than layering it around other things. So I'm going to take this brush, I'm going to try to take as much of the paint off as I can. And we could just go back into mixing our blue and our white, but if you look at our water, it's quite green, which means that we're going to have a very diluted pigment and we really won't have the true blue and the light application that we want. So I'm going to go and wash this, get some clean water, and then we are going to jump back into the sky together. Okay, so we're back. As you can see, we have clean water, a clean brush, and we're going to grab some titanium white from the clean portion of it rather than the portion that has the little bit of green there. It's important that we keep this pigment not diluted. I'm going to grab just a hint of our Cerulean Blue. So now we'll mix that up over here as we have done before. Interject a little bit of that Oxide Black. And this is hopefully a similar color akin to what we have up here. We'll do a little test. I can see immediately that it needs to be a bit brighter. So we'll work in some extra titanium white. Get a nice thorough mix, being careful to avoid this area right here. Yet again, I can see that it needs more titanium white, which is good. This larger mix will be great for doing all we need to, and we won't have to mix more anymore. This would just be perfect. So I'll work this into the side as my little test. I can see that it's actually pretty fantastic. And with that, I'm going to put that down for a second. We're going to pick up a brand new brush, that being our liner. I'm going to make that nice and damp. This will condense the bristles to make them a lot sharper. And then with that, we'll grab some of our pigment and we'll just work it into the edges so you can see the light kind of trickling through. Really easy application to start implementing. I'm making my openings more regular and prominent towards the very edge, as you can see. And then as we get closer and closer to the inside, they get more and more sparse. I apply less pressure with my brush, and it's not as dramatic. Though there are occasional larger areas like that that I will incorporate for the sake of showing that all the trees aren't made the same. We have some real diversity in there too. Now we'll do a little bit more towards the back here, though because this is so far away we won't have as much detail. So we're just going to be a little more sparse through there. If we look in the reference photo to this side, you can see a lot of these little openings through here, and quite a few of them are more vertical because we have trees that are working through them. So we'll also start applying those over here. We'll make sure that we're going off the edge semi-regularly. I think that's a really important part of painting landscapes. That way it doesn't feel like it's all self-contained. If it did, it would look a little unnatural. So we're just interjecting as we see fit, trying to make each area feel a little different than the one beside it. So there's a lot of jumping around. You can see that I'm holding my brush like a pencil right now. Technically that's incorrect. You go to art school, you take painting classes, they teach you not to hold it like that. They teach you to hold it like this, right? More towards the back of the brush. Now when I go in and I do this, I'll actually have a more randomized application. It'll have more flow. I'll be able to see what I'm doing a little better. And I feel compelled to tell you this because, you know, it's how I was taught when I was taking classes for art and painting in university. However, now I'm going to give you the flip side of it. I really like painting when I hold my brush like a pencil. I think there is room for both. I would implore you to try both. See where you feel comfortable and, you know, really give it a shot. Don't just do a couple little taps here and there and decide, you know what, I prefer this way or this way. I think you need to build the skill with both to understand which you really prefer. But I can tell you that I do like both. So we're jumping back and forth. I find when I want to do a lot of intentionality, that's when I'll hold it like this and I'll really double down on making something I want. But again, eventually I want more randomized markings so that it looks a little more organic, and I'll hold my brush differently. And now, as you can see, we're just painting in a different way. But I will jump back and forth. Now, I think it's also worth noting, we have a lot of openings, probably enough at this point, if not very close to it. So I'm just doing some hints, and then we're on to the next step. But this was a fruitful beginning, I think. Again, more tight applications towards the back because there will just be less detail in general. You can also switch over to this brush, grab some of the color of the sky, and work that down and in. Yet again, this can actually be really nice for softening your foliage, making it look like a lot of light is working its way into it. You don't have to do that, but it will make it look really misty if that's a look you're looking for. There we go. I do really like that. If you need to, you can always go back and add more green pigment throughout. Here you can see I'm adding just a hint of this working its way down. Really feel like the light is rolling in. We will be doing applications over top this with additional foliage. So if you overdo it, don't worry, there will be opportunity to add in more green, but I think this is actually pretty great to begin with. I like that a lot. Feels like it has some real depth now. You do need to be careful that you're not spreading out your initial taps too much in this process, but for the most part you should be okay. That said, I'm not going to need that for a little while, so I am going to wet it. We are going to let it fully dry after wiping off our excess pigment. I'm going to wet this brush because it too needs some opportunity, some time to dry. And then we're going to go back to mixing with this one right here. And our next step, I think, is working on some of the trees in the background, or, you know, I was thinking about this after the fact, I kind of want a bit of a background to build on top of here. So this is something that we could have extended over to the side. I'm thinking about doing it now. I think I'm just going to do it now. So what are we going to do here? We're going to make a bluish green mix. This, for the most part, is dried. I'm not concerned about working over it. Again, blue and green, the colors that made that. I'll grab some of our white. This time I will grab from the area that is diluted because we are mixing a diluted pigment anyway. Grabbing some Oxide Black to make sure it's not too saturated. And we'll just start applying this. Beautiful color. I think we make it a little more blue towards the edge and maybe a bit brighter as well. So we'll throw that in. We'll throw this in. Try to start moving the pigment to a slightly different area than that. That way I have a reference point. I can tell I like it, but I want it to be a little brighter still. You see that has a lot of brightness to it. And we're not going to get something that looks exactly like this because that's a layered area, and what we're applying right now does not have layers. It is simply a flat hue, though one I do like a lot. So now we'll blend these together. Nice little X-shaped pattern. So it's a little closer to us, which is nice. Though now we need to do the bottom, make it a little darker. So we'll grab some of our Oxide Black, some of our green gold. Mark that up from the bottom. Very good. A little more Oxide Black, a little more green gold. Very good, very good. Just like so, just like so. Now, again, we need texture. So I'm going to go back to this brush. I'm going to just try to dry it off a little bit better. You can do that in your palm too. Peel back the bristles. We're going to try to do all this while it's still wet. And I'm glad we didn't do this initially because we could have, but it's important to see that you can go back and change these things, make edits, fix them up. Just shows how forgiving acrylics as a medium is, because it is very forgiving, and it's one of the reasons why I love it. It really promotes exploratory applications. You don't have to be afraid to try something because you know if it doesn't work out, well, you can just wait 10 minutes, cover it up, and try again. That's a beautiful thing. That said, here we're just tapping on this texture, similar to how we did before. You can see it's pretty set in the distance, which I like. And maybe just make it a little bit darker, just a little bit, like that, for the bottom, like so. Very good. All right. So at this point, the question is, what do we do next? We could add a couple little openings back here. And I think that should be pretty easy actually, because we have our liner brush ready. We have our white pigment ready. And we can just tap this on really without any friction. So I'm going to do a small amount of it. Very good. Grab a little bit more. Double down on some of the areas that I like. Because this is so wet, the applications that I'm applying are blending a little bit, and that's okay. It's just making it more subtle. Just continue to build it out. There we go. There we go. Okay, so we are back. It is a brand new day, and as you can see, we have fresh water, fresh pigment, and our next step is a fun one. We're going to begin crafting all of the very subtle little trees in the background. So hundreds of tiny little guys. We are going to try to work with a palette similar to this for the background, and then we'll get more of the distinct browns and whatnot for the foreground. But to begin, we will grab just a hint of our burnt umber. It's worth noting all of this is dry, so I'll work on top of it. I'm not going to worry about it. We'll grab a little bit of Oxide Black. We'll grab a good amount of titanium white, and we'll start mixing this about. Now if we were to apply this to the canvas, it would be far too bright and it wouldn't really match what we have. We want this to be nice and subtle. So what are we going to do? We're going to grab a little bit of blue, because we do have quite a bit of blue back here. We will have cool light on it. We're also going to grab some of our green, which, as you can see, I forgot to put on the palette. So we'll do that. Always unfortunate when a little bit of the paint isn't used from the last session, but that's also okay. I'd rather have an excess of paint rather than too little, because when we have too little, often we try to stretch it out, use other pigments. Your mix isn't really what you want, and then your painting isn't really what you want. So I'm a believer of putting slightly more down and accepting that you just can't use all of it. And that's okay too. We try to be responsible. We try to be mindful. We do our best. That said, again, adding more and more to this mix, you can see that it's now a really nice green. We'll make it more and more earthy. I think that right there is beautiful. It has green hues reflecting on it, but it is kind of a brown. It isn't too bright, it isn't too dark. I think that's perfect. For the actual application process, I'm going to begin with my liner brush. Make sure that's nice and damp. Condense those bristles. Grab a little bit of it. And I'm actually going to begin here because we can move in both directions. And this will essentially just give me the most freedom to make it bigger or smaller. It's the easiest place to start because you can make adjustments in both directions. I'm trying to make these lines with a series of little strokes. I'm also going to make the camera a little bit darker because I can tell the light is coming out outside. It's one of those days where it's bright and then it's dark, and then it's bright and then it's dark, and because of that, I am just going to continuously adjust that so you can see everything appropriately. That said, here, as you can see, we are branching off. I am trying to make lots of little additions. And something else you'll notice about this is I'm not making one individually long stroke. It's all comprised of many micro applications. That way it looks a little more organic, a little more natural. You can see that we are very often heading back to the palette, to the water, to build this up and out. Beautiful. I like that. I like that a lot. Now, let's build slightly more to the left. Our trees can get slightly larger because we are moving closer to us and the foreground. Sometimes I'll make my mixes very watery. Sometimes we'll make them a little, oh, I'm just going to darken that for you. Sometimes you'll make them a little more opaque and thick. If they are really watery, I can go back over them. But for me, right now, the most important thing is just figuring out the spacing and starting to establish a level of detail, right? We can do ones that crisscross. I think that's actually a really important part of painting trees in general. Having ones that go in front of and behind others. Because if all of your trees are effectively the same, they're all just moving vertically, they don't have a lot of depth. You get depth when they show that some are in front and some are behind. Here, you have lots of little branches. And this is a very cathartic process. So many minute applications that will eventually lead to a very lovely forest. There we go. Sometimes they end up meeting together at the base. That's always a nice way of creating more of a unique look. It guarantees that they spread out in an interesting way. And as we get more this way, make sure that your applications get smaller earlier. That way they can branch out earlier, and that way we don't have too larger branches close to the top, because they should be pretty subtle at the top, pretty small. As they are rather far away and towards the tops of the trees, they are going to be tinier because they just haven't had enough time to grow and be large. Okay, we're going to continue the route up. So far so good. Really enjoying this one. Again, very much looking forward to summer. Already starting to feel like it. Though as we get towards the back here, I'm going to start making smaller strokes, so less pressure with the brush, and I'm very soon going to change my mix. That way things are a little more subtle as we move back. Let's do that. Let's grab some extra water, liven that paint up again, make it a little brighter with a little more titanium white, make it a little more green, a little more blue, and this right here should continue our pattern well. So the big tip here is, even when you're painting trees, subjects of this nature, remember that you don't have to use just a brown or a simple mix that one might assume. Often your color will change pretty dramatically depending upon how close or far away your subject is and how much atmospheric light there is. You can see it's really standing out through here, which is nice. We're making incredibly watery markings towards the top. That way it looks like our branches are just getting lost in the light. But down towards the bottom, I'll double down, I'll make the applications more opaque, more thick. And it's all about just gauging that progression from the foreground to the background in both size and value. I'm going to be careful not to make these too big. I think I was getting close with those ones. My next applications will be smaller, they'll be tighter. I'm also skipping areas, so I'm not making full lines at this point because I want it to look like some of the foliage is getting lost, or some of the branches are getting lost behind foliage rather. Though we will be painting on more foliage, so if you do too many of these, don't worry about that either, because it is a very malleable process and we will have an opportunity to cover up the ones you don't like, or just an excess amount of them if you did more than you wanted to. So I'd recommend just having fun, exploring, get comfortable with the process of adding this pigment. Throw some of them back here, because there will be trees in the distance here as well. And it'll bridge this area and this area via hue in a nice subtle way. See that? Working them in between. Little details make a big difference. Now, looking at this area here, I have some really opaque spots and some rather large ones that I need to give sharper endings. I think I'll definitely have to go over this again with some additional foliage, but that's okay. Just making sure that things look like they make sense in that space. And I'm creating really sharp lines in the background through here to give it even more depth. There we go. That's much better. Really natural looking too. On this side, we need slightly darker trees than this, so we're actually going to take it in the other direction. More Oxide Black, more green, more brown. Mix that well into the past mix. a little bit of titanium white because we don't want it to be too saturated. And if it gets too bright, we can just work some more Oxide Black into it as well. So we just go back and forth until we get what we really want. No need to rush it, no need to commit to a pigment you don't really connect with. Let's also grab some additional titanium white. Brighten that a hair. Good. Good, good, good. Make that a little more damp. Lots of back and forth, you know? I like that. I like that a lot. More color. I think we go darker. I think we go a little bit darker, more Oxide Black. More burnt umber. And now the trees will also change hue a couple of times, which makes them even more interesting. So don't fear having to change the pigment, recognize it's actually a strength of the piece in the end. Now we're making some that are truly a bit more unique. Yeah, I like that. Okay. We'll just continue building this out. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. I think we add a bit more. Again, the same rule applies at the edge, in that you want to feel like portions of your painting are moving off of it to make it expansive and not confined to the rectangular shape of the canvas. So we'll create some mini branches that work its way out. We'll make some mini branches that find their way all the way to the top. Maybe this one has a little branch that goes that way. Maybe we'll make a more watery mix for a semi-transparent one that's just less dark. It moves through there and then finds its way off the canvas. Remember, we're going to add more foliage. Remember, you can add more openings in the tree. We will have plenty of opportunities to make this more interesting. And I'm also going back down to the base of some of these trees, which were done in a different lighter hue, and I'm making them a little bit darker because there will be less light towards the bottom than there is at the top. So it's nice when you can incorporate a slight gradient at the base. It's one of those things that takes almost no time, but it has a big impact. The more you do, the more you'll see. Though I do want to be careful not to overdo. And now we're just sketching in little branches. And I do mean little. Again, such a fun painting. Looking out today, and the trees in the window are getting even more green, even more full, which makes me just want to paint even more green and make this even more full. Art often inspired by life and nature, right? There. Okay, I think that's actually a great base for a lot of this. I'm going to sharpen this just a little bit. Maybe incorporate a soft line through there because it was pretty open. And now we're probably on to our next step, which can be one of two things. It can be adding more openings into here, and that's relatively simple. We're just going to take our titanium white into our ultramarine blue, mix those up. And I'm not typically one to mix using a liner brush because it's just not ideal to mix with the amount of bristles it has. You can't move around a lot of paint. However, I am doing so here because we don't need a lot of paint. So as you can see, we can tap in more openings around our branches. I always think this is such a pretty look. Light shining through trees. Trying to make it nice and thick, because if it's not, you won't notice. I think we create even more openings towards the top. We stagger it. But then you can have the occasional little one through the mid portions. I also kind of like to squint my eyes sometimes when I'm doing this, as it helps me visualize where I want more of these without the hindrance of an eye for detail, because an eye for detail can be wonderful when we're refining, but when we're trying to spread out an application, a texture, sometimes it can kind of cloud judgment. We double down on something until it's too overdone, but this, with a semi-closed eye, can be really good. Now we're just doing subtle taps throughout. There we go. I like that. I think that's much better. Though, we are far from done. At this point, we want to let all of this dry quite well, and then we can go in with some additional foliage, texture. Then we can add some light rays through it, and at that point, our background will be close to finished. We can start thinking about our midground, which will be really fun because it's even more detail, and rather than using or rendering the idea of something, we are rendering something. Okay, while this was drying, I was thinking about how we could make it a little bit better, and I did come to an idea where we're going to add a little bit of light to the right-hand side of a lot of the trees that are more prominent. So, what does that look like? We have this color right here. This is the color of a lot of the actual trees. So we're going to make it a little bit brighter, add a little bit of titanium white. We're also going to make it a little bit more blue, add some cerulean blue. You can see that it's starting to dry, so I'm going to grab some extra water. We're going to mix this well, and just like that, we should have a nice highlighted pigment for the sides of our trees. I'll start with this one. Just give a quick application. You can kind of see it at the bottom because towards the bottom it is so dark. So you get towards the top, it's a less noticeable. So I actually like this, but I think we can go brighter. More titanium white. Spread that about well. That way we have a relatively consistent application. Though with this, it is okay if there is variance, as different portions of the tree will have different amounts of light. This is perfect. This is actually perfect. Just what we were looking for. And I'm trying to apply it in a slightly rough manner, meaning that I'm letting my brush raise here and there, skipping areas, and that's just going to make it look like the tree has little indentations and pieces to it that don't catch light. We're not going to do as much towards the bottom because we do still want that to be a little bit darker, but you can see very quickly that this does add some dimensionality to the piece. Makes the light look stronger. Such an easy addition as well. Can't believe we almost continued without it. That would have been my bad. But I do love it. We can also add hints of it in the background. We can even paint individual branches with it in the background, if you have some negative space that you'd like to fill in. Now when we add foliage, it'll have even more depth, which is often the big goal with scenes like this because they have so much opportunity for it. You want to really take advantage of that which these can be, you know? So much opportunity. Definitely need more water. We can use this in the background as well. Then we'll just jump around. That way we have an opportunity to give some areas a rest, a break. Think about if we want more of it before we hard commit. There we go. It's quite lovely, isn't it? All right. So this was a very small application, not a large one. Because of that, that'll dry very quickly. While we wait for it to dry, I think we'll mix up our next color of foliage, which will be predominantly a green gold. We need to desaturate it a little bit. We need to thicken it. So titanium white, and again, desaturate oxide black. little honk honk in the background. You hear that? And more titanium white. Hint of blue because we are still in the background. I think we do a test, a small test, with our liner brush. The thing with this, I don't want it to be too bright, I don't want it to be too saturated, I want room to make it more so in the foreground, but I do want something that can pop out to a point throughout here. And as I tap that, I think it's close. I think it could be just a hint brighter. So more titanium white, and then I'm going to switch to a new brush, one we haven't used quite yet, that being the stiff bristled fan brush. Again, individual bristles, great for tapping on myriads of detail. However, we can also make wonderful little pieces of foliage by adding some water to it, allowing the brush to fork. See that? Different aesthetic now. And this is how I love to do a lot of foliage and around my trees. So here, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to tap. I'm rotating my brush every now and then, but I'm always rotating it in the sky, never on the canvas. If we rotate it on the canvas, then we'll get really awkward, unfinished streaks. But by doing it like this, we just get good depth and a lovely application on the painting. I'm going to leave lots of negative space. I think we'll also do little touch-ups with the liner brush when we want to develop more intentionality. Though it's worth noting, this is still the background, so we don't want it to be too detailed. Not yet, anyway. Want to leave room for that for our next layers. That said, I do want more paint, so we have white, we have black, we have green, we have white, and that looks relatively close. I do like that. Again, going to make sure this is damp, that it is forking, and cleaning it here and there, changing the way it forks can be quite nice. Here we're applying it up towards the top, ensuring that we do get a nice full application. As I run out of pigment, I'm starting to move down towards the bottom, which will be more sparse as we just won't have as much foliage in this space. So I'm starting up here. And now I'm working my way down. Lots of little rotations. And at this point, we are going to need to change the color a little bit. I'm also going to change the lighting on the camera a little bit. There we go. Before I do that, more water, more pigment. Being relatively selective with this, just because we are now in an area where you will notice a lot of that detail. Towards the bottom, because it is darker, you do notice it more. And then as we transition into this area, which will be a bit more blue, we are going to make the mix a bit more blue. But I'm going to take this, I'm going to work it over onto this side just a little bit. We'll cover this with a lot of trees, a lot of bushes later, but it won't hurt to have just a hint of it in behind already. So, just a hint. As for the rest of it, actually, follow me here for a second. I'm going to make this brighter as a whole before I make it more blue, because I want the tops to be a little brighter. We can interject more depth very, very simply. Just follow my lead. The goal is to not make this a dramatic change, because a dramatic change will undoubtedly stand out too much. But just a hint of it here and there on the edge of the larger clusters that stand out. That's lovely. There's some magic in that right there. Okay. So again, once this is done, we're just about there. We are going to change the mix to be a bit more blue. So I'll take the remainder of that pigment off the brush, go to our cerulean, work that in, make it even brighter, because this as a whole is brighter. Maybe a little more cerulean. There we go. Quite nice. More blue, more blue, more white. You can see how the mix is changing pretty dramatically. It's not a bad thing. Not a bad thing at all. That said, this area in the back, you really won't see that much detail. So we're adding a bit of it for this transitionary period, but you want it to blend in with this for the most part. You don't want to see a lot of variance in the way that you can over on this side. Still nice to have over the drawn branches, but to be done mindfully, you know? Not a bad start. Actually quite nice. Okay, now this is looking pretty good. I think it needs a couple of things to really solidify it before we add in the light rays, but before we do that, there's another little piece to the background I think that I want to incorporate, and it's this bush right here. You can tell it's in the background because it's a lot darker, where the foreground is very bright. It's quite noticeable. So an easy addition, a fun addition, especially at this point, in that we are going to take our large flathead brush, we're going to grab a little bit of our Oxide Black, good amount, I do mean a good amount, of our green, titanium white. You can see that we're really starting to do a number down there. And that's a nice mid-value green. Now let's make a darker one. I'm going to take even more of our green, move it off here, a little more of our Oxide Black, move it here. We're not going to have a lot of blue, but we are going to have a hint of it because it is still somewhat in the background. Now, again, can't have it be too dark, can't have it be too saturated, so I'm going back with a lot of the white a lot of the black. Now I'm going to just work in an X-shaped pattern to render the base for what will be a bush, making it nice and thick, and should really just come up right about there. Not too dramatic, nothing special. You can see how it dips down like that. For the most part, we could also have it move through there. I want this to be leading lines. I want this to push the eye. So far so good. Now, we're going to make it a little bit darker for the real base. More Oxide Black in the mix. More Oxide Black. Very good, very good. And then once we have this, we're going to switch on over to this brush right here, and we're going to tap on some texture. That said, this does need to dry before we do that, otherwise it'll all blend, and as we get closer to us, we need it to actually get sharper, not get softer. So I'm going to wait probably 2 minutes, and then we'll head in there with some additional texture detail, quite similar to how we did in the background. I really like doing this now because I think it's a great refresher of what we did do, so we remember the steps, we remember the process for when we go into our very next painting. Okay, so we are back. I'm just going to make sure this is nice and wet, nice and malleable for us to work with. So I'm working a little bit of extra water into it. We are, as noted, going to pick up this brush, peel back those bristles. You can see the sun shifting pretty dramatically in the background, but I think you can still see pretty well. And we're just going to tap on a little bit of this darker texture. I think we actually need it to be a bit darker than it is. Slightly more Oxide Black in the mix. There we go. And this is subtle. It's not meant to really stand out. It's not meant to be dramatic. It's just meant to add a little bit of life, a little bit of an organic look to something that would have otherwise just been a little too flat. So far, so good. I do like how soft it is. And now we want to add some highlight to it. How do we do that? Well, we make sure this brush is a little bit less dark. We add slightly more green, and a lot of this green, as you can see, is diluted currently. So I'm going to add some extra green gold. I'm going to add a little bit of extra titanium white as well. That way we don't get too much blue or black in it. We'll just add to what we have here. Not complicated. And then for the actual application of the leaves, I'm going to do what I did up here, which is using this brush while it's nice and damp. I'm going to tap on a myriad of these little guys, leaving openings, allowing it to work its way out into the rest of the forest, because these will protrude pretty dramatically throughout their space. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And then I'm letting it dissipate as we work our way in. So I'm rotating, I'm running out of pigment. As we run out of pigment, we naturally get a softer look, less opaque, more dark, and that's great because towards the bottom we want more shadows anyway. I can also then work it back up into the negative space and have more subtle areas towards the top rather than the harsh contrast through all of it. But it really should be a change, a gradient through texture and tap. Now we go a little bit brighter, more titanium white, hint more green gold. Green gold, it's very luminous pigment. Typically it carries a lot of vibrancy, so you don't need a lot to have a big impact. It's my favorite color when working on sunny summers or springs. Sometimes, admittedly, it can be a little too warm for spring scenes, but definitely for summer. Okay. See, we're starting to work these in. It's dissipating as we move towards the bottom and the back. Trying to stagger my taps so that they're different sizes. You want some to be bigger, some to be smaller. There we go. Let's go brighter yet again. Minute changes make a big difference. And we could add just a hint of blue into this, but I do mean a hint. I'm starting on the edge where we're getting the most light. We'll allow that to start working its way back. But the idea is that the top and this edge here are going to be brighter, and therefore they're going to have more of the highlight because they are in fact closer to this light. Now we can have little areas that are bright inside because they protrude and they catch extra light. But again, for the most part, we're working towards our edges. There we go. I like that. I like that. Trying to do the squint test just to make sure that things are progressing as they should. And I think they are. So I'm quite happy there. I am indeed. Now we can clean off this brush relatively well, switch on over to the liner brush, grab more of that highlight, and do individual little taps just to ensure that the edges are built out in a way that we like, and there is an interjection of intentionality and detail. Very good. Very, very good. I really like this. I really like where we're going. Okay, now I think we start really thinking about the next step, and that next step is a beautiful light working its way through here. For that, we're going to need a couple of things. One, very clean brushes. Two, very clean water. And three, a completely dry canvas. So I'm going to take a 5-minute break. I'm going to clean everything, and then when we come back, we do the light rays. Okay, so we are back. We have clean water. We have clean white pigment. My brushes are clean. And I've actually opted to grab a brand new brush for this part of the painting, one you're likely quite familiar with from watching the lessons, but that brush is the Filbert. You can see it as there's nice rounded edges, wonderful for soft blends, great for rendering light, clouds, mist, things of that nature. Now, we are going to use this, however, I don't want too much pigment on it, so I'm actually going to do the mix for my light with the larger flat-headed brush, which again is nice and clean. I'm going to make it quite wet, and then we're going to grab some of our titanium white. We'll probably place it right down here, and then we'll grab a little bit of blue, and I do mean just a little bit. We want this to be akin to what we have in the sky, and we'll blend this out a good extent. I'm also going to make it quite watery, so I'm adding extra water into the mix because I want it to be semi-transparent. So the more water we add, the more semi-transparent it is. We do risk it becoming too semi-transparent, but again, you can just add more paint at that point. Now I do have this brush right here. I'm actually not going to wet it or do anything to it because there's so much water in here. Now we will grab some of this, and the light rays are going to be coming down this way. We're going to start in the sky from here, and we're just going to work our way with that in mind. So application number 1. We start at the top, that way it's most opaque here. As we come down, we let it lessen, but I'm also, as you can see, blending out the sides so they're not too dramatic. Now we'll go up here, we'll say, okay, if this is the circular beginning point, then this will be on a slightly different angle than this, but they both connect right here. Again, I don't want a sharp line, so I'm going to use the nice rounded corners that this brush offers to blend out that which I've applied. And soft is key here. If you find it's a little too stark, you can just grab more water. And here, you can see it becomes extremely malleable. Now you don't have to do this. This is really just if you want to soften it or move it around in a more dramatic way. But I like that a lot. Now, we'll grab more. Say, okay, it's coming from here, that way, there, that way. That means there's also some down here. Some that moves a little more vertically than horizontally. Again, the area in this space will be brighter, so I'll go over the areas that are close to the top more, build up that opacity slightly to a point. We'll also have some streaming in through here. You can see that my brush always starts on this side, and then I move it like so. There we are. Needed a couple applications because I had a lot of water on my brush, but eventually we got to a point where it received the pigment well. Now we'll just soften it a little bit more. Going over our past applications numerous times. We can really soften the tops through there. Now there's an immense amount of depth, and there'll be way more once we start adding the trees in to it as well. But this is a great beginning. Have to be careful not to add too much water to any area, because then you can start stripping the paint off. But we are being mindful, and we will continue to be mindful. There we are. We're just working it in all of these other directions simultaneously. You can see it's one of those things we just keep going back to. And eventually, we'll have something we love. Very good. I actually like this a lot. I don't know that I want to do any more. Nothing dramatic anyway. Oh, that was perfect actually. Okay. Very, very happy with this. That means that we can actually start moving on to our next step. And that next step could be a number of things. As you can see, we have some extra light on the bush down here. We could also start adding in trees like this, which are in between the foreground and the middle ground. We could also start implementing the ground that we have through here, because there's a more earthy application to be done, and then we add the greens on top of it, but it does need a rather unaesthetic base, to be honest, and at some point soon we do need to do that. That said, taking a look at it, I think what I want to do, I think what I'm really excited about is in fact doing some of these larger trees. So for that, let's continue using this brush. Take some of that pigment off, grab a little bit of our burnt sienna, or burnt umber rather, our cerulean blue, because we have a lot of light working through this, oxide black. We could also incorporate a little bit of green, of course, but we really want this to look like light is moving through it in a big way. So it's soft, it's desaturated, it's an interesting color, but one that makes sense in the context of the painting. And you could go in and re-sketch this based off of the traceable, but I can still kind of see where my trees were, so I'm not too worried about that. I'm just going to start sketching with my pigment, creating a tree with this brush. I love this brush because it does hold a lot of paint. It allows me to move a lot of paint and get really sharp edges. I'm also going to make the top a little bit brighter, so I'm going to have more titanium white, but I'm only going to do that to half the mix because I want the other half for another tree or for touch-ups. But the top of this should definitely be brighter. Okay, now we'll do a blend down. We're going to add some of this highlight to the right-hand side because the right-hand side of the tree will get more light. And that right there is a nice addition. We can also take our little liner brush, make that nice and damp, grab some of this and just work on some additional branches. I'm going to apply very little pressure. That way it's not too thick. There we go. Because we have the water, it kind of just gets lost in the sky, which I like. I might add a little bit of this darker hue to the backs of some of the top just to make it slightly more dimensional. But it's a nice start. Now we have another tree like this just over here, and I can see it in the reference photo on this quadrant. You can still see the quadrant at the bottom. It's the left-hand side. It's a little bit more saturated, a little bit darker than what we have. So I know that I actually need to add a little bit of oxide black and a little bit of burnt umber to our previous mix. And then I can take this and I can work it in. This is on top of the bush that we have here. It's a little bit larger than what we have over here. Making it through multiple strokes. That way it's organic. Feels like it's moving properly. There's unique little divots and such. I also always try to paint these a little bit smaller than I want them, and then I expand on them and I make them thicker through additional layers because it's a lot easier to make them bigger than it is to make them smaller. So that's another nice tree. Something it doesn't have, but I actually want it to have, is a second little tree that's kind of coming up from beside it. This isn't in the reference photo. Just kind of an idea I have now. It's one of those things where when you paint, your ideas open up. You have opportunity to do more because you just understand what you're working with better. So I'm slowly just crafting a second part to this tree to make it a little more interesting. Like so. We do need to add a highlight to the edge of it. So we'll go back over here to the highlight we have, make it slightly darker by mixing in this. Then we can add that to the side. Because the light will be working its way around it. We do want it to look three-dimensional. We want to take the liner brush I'm going to take this and I'm just going to do a little taps, working it backwards into the rest of the bark. And by doing these little taps and drags, it'll make it look like it does have bark that protrudes and sticks out and then catches light. You want it to look a little rough. You want it to look a little disheveled. Like that. Okay. Very good, very good. I like that. I like that a lot. We do have a much more prominent tree right through here, but I'm not ready to do that. So instead, I think I'll just interject some additional branches, or at least I'll try, but that was evidently too watery. So we'll mix up a little more paint yet again. We know what our mix needs to look like because we have a lot of it right here. A little bit of blue maybe. Always fun remixing pigments. Great little mid-painting challenges. Little side quests, if you will. There we go. Now it sounds like it might be getting a little loud outside for a second. My apologies if you can hear that. I always try to make these a nice, relaxed experience, but I think as we were just talking about earlier, regardless of where you live, there will be noise in some regard. It might be a lawnmower in the suburbs, it might be a car horn in the city. But I think once you stop thinking about it as something that you can avoid, and rather just a part of life, it doesn't seem so bad. Doesn't seem so serious. There we go. Again, really like what we're doing. This will have a good amount of foliage on it. We're not ready to implement it, but we will relatively soon. I'm also going to implement a nice little tree over here. Just a subtle one. This can actually go up off the canvas. We'll add a lot of foliage over top this later on, but it'll be nice to have. Going with the liner, make some more intentional markings. There we go. There we go. There we go. All right. So far, so good. Okay, so at this point, everything nice and dry. We are going to start moving on to this section, particularly the ground, which we're going to layer all of our bushes and trees on top of. So the ground here is actually going to have a lot of burnt umber, and we're going to try to transition it so there are areas that are more so in shadow, and then some that are more in light. The top of the hill, the area that is a little bit higher up, will receive more light, but we're also going to have a lot of trees through here, which will create shadows on the ground through here. We'll have more of an opening through this section. So as we begin to plot all of the ground in our reference photo, we're going to try to be mindful of this. So let's begin, as we have with all of our backgrounds. Our larger flat-headed brush, we'll make sure it's nice and damp, wipe off the excess. And then again, our primary most used color here will be the burnt sienna, or other burnt umber. All of this is fully dry, so I'm not going to worry about covering any of it up, though I'm going to go down here just so I can continue to reference these hues in our palette. Now we need to make this desaturated and more thick, so we throw in some titanium white. Very good. Maybe a little bit of our green gold. That way it works with the rest of the hues in the painting, and a hint of our Oxide Black. We don't want too much because it will desaturate it, but we do want a little bit. Now I'm going to interject a little bit more brown, a little bit more green. And this would be good for the highlighted areas of our ground, which I'm going to start placing through here. I'm not going to worry about the top area because that, for the most part, will be foliage. We're going to do a lot of foliage down here on top of this. So I like that color. I think I like it enough to really double down on it. So we're going to make a lot more. Burnt sienna, green, or burnt umber, green gold. I don't know why I'm thinking about burnt sienna. I think because burnt sienna is typically a warmer brown, and we are working in an area that is warmer, that it just naturally makes sense. But I did want to keep the palette a bit more muted. That way we could focus on our greens to a greater degree. So I did opt for the burnt umber. You could go with the burnt sienna if you wanted to be a little more red, a little bit more warm. I like what we're doing though. And here you can see I'm just really mixing till we get what we really want. Though I do like how sandy this looks in comparison. Again, if the goal is something that looks natural, this might actually be ideal. And you can see the original pigment up there. I think this is ideal. I think I'm going to go over what I just applied. And if I want it to be a little more brown, a little warmer, we'll re-interject that a little bit later. But for now, I think we just create this larger application. Again, brighter. This side will be darker. So from here we can grab some more Oxide Black, burnt umber, said it correctly this time. We'll mix it partially with our previous mix, and we'll throw this over here, and that's perfect. Oh, I love when it just works. Beautiful. Okay, so this is all in theory in shadow, and then we'll have a relatively soft transition from one into the next. And that just means I'm not doing a really wide blend. I'm keeping it fairly tight, like that. It's okay if your brush strokes show through, it'll just add unique intricacies into the ground, and that's a good thing. So we can also take this pigment, which is now a little muddy, a little dirty, and that's a good thing, into here. We can throw some towards the bottom corner because it'll be a little bit darker. You can see I got a little brush hair on the canvas. I'm just going to pick that up with my brush rather than my fingers. And I might even take a little bit more of this, again, put it in that corner, put it towards the base because the top of the hill will receive more light. And we're just trying to create good transitions, natural transitions. You can start tapping some of the highlight into the darker area. You can start taking that darker area and moving it into your more highlighted spots. But the idea is we're just trying to create lots of little uneven portions in the ground, and you show those by creating minute shadows and highlights. It's really easy in a setting like this because we're constantly going from dark values to light values, and we can drag some of our dark values into our light values and vice versa. Now there are a lot of different ways of adding detail to the ground, and we're going to implement a lot of them. However, I do think this is a great way to start, and I will admit I'm already very happy with our initial progress. It's one of those things where this is a subject we're going to pretty much fully cover up, and despite that, I don't want to because I really like it. That's the spot you should be. That was beautiful, actually. That's really nice. Okay. You know, maybe I approach this a little differently. There are a lot of different ways to paint every subject, and I think a lot of it is personal preference, approaching a painting the way you enjoy it. But I also think sometimes you just kind of need to make a read on what the painting's saying. right? There are a lot of, I think, Michelangelo quotes about how he doesn't do the sculpting, he listens to the sculpture, he listens to the rock, he tries to do what it wants rather than trying to do what he wants and force it. Maybe we adopt a little bit of that idea. I really like the subtle texture. I like the transition. I think what I was going to do is I was going to grab this brush and I was going to tap on a lot of a really dark mix and tap in just a lot of texture. And I was going to go over it with a lighter version, same brush. I'd make it damp so that the bristles would condense and it would create a randomization, but sometimes you'd have lines. And I think I want to be a little more meticulous. This will take longer, but it'll guarantee things look the way you want them to. So here I'm actually just going to grab some extra Oxide Black, work that into our darker mix. So this will be the darkest mix we have. I'm going to switch on over to our liner brush and make that nice and damp. And the liner brush is about the size of what this would be if we made it damp and our bristles condensed. So this is actually just what we would be doing with the other brush, except instead of making 6 markings, we're making 1, and that 1 is much more intentional. Now I'm going to grab the really dark pigment, and I'm going to manually, stroke by stroke, interject these shadows, so areas in the ground that are divoting, that don't catch as much light as everything else. It'll be much more noticeable towards the middle and the light, so I kind of like to get the majority of the pigment off in the darker area, and then I'll go back towards this area once my brushes started to run out of that pigment. I'm also going over a lot of the markings I was making with a slightly more damp brush. This is going to make my markings semi-opaque and semi-see-through. So while the pigment is really dark right now on the palette, you can see the markings that I'm making are much less so. And that's just because there's so much water in them that it's distilling it and making it much more subtle. Again, something we value here. All right. Very good, very good. Like this. Yeah, you can see it takes a lot longer, but I really like the effect. We're not looking for anything too dramatic. We're just looking for variance. You can create larger motions, movements. You can add little rocks if you want to. But you can see that the taps in the background are smaller and the ones in the foreground are a bit bigger. That's intentional because we just can't see as much detail in the background as we can in the foreground. Yeah, that's nice. Okay, now we're going to go in the opposite direction. We're going to clean our brush. I'm going to clean our brush. This is the highlighted pigment. We're going to make it a little bit more highlighted. A little more white, a little more brown. Mix it with the previous mix, but it's brighter. Perfect. Now, because it's brighter, and we want it to be brighter, we probably don't want as much water on our brush because the water will thin it, and it's difficult sometimes to see a highlight over a darker value because acrylics are innately semi-transparent. So here, our thought process, our application is very opaque. If you want it to show up to a greater degree. If you don't, if you want it to be really subtle, then yeah, you can add more water. And you can see here what that looks like. I'm doing a bit of a combination of the two. I don't think one is necessarily right or wrong. I would lead with the more opaque in the areas that you do want to be brighter, like this top, because again, we're just gonna have more light in that spot. But as you get towards the edges, as you move it out, you might wanna interject some of that watery hue. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. We're doing really good. Patience. It's amazing what it'll get you. There. Okay. So at this point, I think I actually want to go back in, make that slightly darker. So I'll mix up a slightly darker variant, mix it with our previous variant, make these edges a bit more on the Oxide Black side, though there is still a good amount of burnt umber. Still a little bit of green. Something else you can do to these shadows, I didn't opt to do it because I wanted this to distinctly stand out from that. You could add a little bit of blue into your shadows, make them a little cooler, make it a little more dynamic. Right now we're just using green as an additional hue with the brown, but you could diversify it even more if you so choose. It's not necessary, but it is an option. Okay. Very good. Okay, so we are back. As you can see, I cleaned my water because we are going to move on to the next step, and I did let this all fully dry. So now we can go in with all of this beautiful foliage that we have at the bottom. There is, don't get me wrong, a lot to do, but I think it's going to be lovely. I think it's going to be a relaxed endeavor. And I think we're going to begin, you guessed it, with the large flat-headed brush. So we'll make sure that's nice and damp, wipe off the excess, grab an abundance of our green gold, and we can see a lot of our greens here that we've already used. This first green in the background is so saturated and light that even the darker, more shadow areas are pretty bright. So I think I'm actually going to begin with something akin to what we had here, but even maybe a little bit more light. So I'm going to begin with just some titanium white and green gold for our mix. We're going to mix up a good amount of it because we have a lot of canvas to cover. And then we're going to add in a little bit of our Oxide Black to take down that saturation and that vibrancy. But we're still going to keep it, for the most part, brighter than anything else we've used previously. So I think this is a good start. Now, I think we're going to take it in here. And I'm just going to loosely place pigment in all of the open, still white areas of the canvas because these are all going to be bright spots. Nice and easy, very good. I think honestly it could be a little bit darker, just a little bit though. We still want it to be brighter than our past mixes. So I'm just going to put this more so towards the bottom actually, because if the top's a hint brighter, that's actually a good thing. It creates a little bit more depth. We can make this area a little bit darker too, because it's towards the bottom. But now we're going to switch on over to our fan brush. We talked about doing this in the last step, but opted to use the liner, and we can use the liner here. We actually will, but I'm going to make this brush semi-damp, take off all the excess paint. It's going to fork the bristles, and we're going to take that. We're just going to begin just working some individual little pieces of foliage up into the canvas. Nothing too tricky. You've done a lot of this in other portions of the painting. Also, when I zoom out here, you can see just how bright all of this is comparatively to everything else we have. So don't feel intimidated by the brightness or the dramatic variance. That's not a bad thing. Not in this setting, not with what we're doing right now. So we just start by applying that across the edge. We can bring it down and in a little bit. So far so good. And we're going to have a lot of greenery in here, but I think we start by making this a little bit brighter. We're going to kind of work backwards. We're going to switch on over to our liner brush, make that nice and damp, and now we'll focus on some intentionality. towards the tops. And this will make the markings that we just made actually look a lot less bright, a lot more subtle, subdued. It'll kind of work them into the background. So it's fun how you can use juxtaposition to dramatically alter the way an area feels in a painting. One of those things where we could have desaturated it to make it less prominent, but we didn't have to, because the highlights are going to do that for us very naturally. I'm grabbing a lot of water back and forth because this is a process that is going to require sharp details, and to keep our brush sharp, we're probably going to want to keep a good amount of water condensing those bristles, right? Also, because this is so close to us, all of the individual leaves are quite noticeable, which is why when I used the fan brush, I condensed the bristles. It's because I wanted bigger markings. I like this as a series of big markings. I think this looks really good. Perfect size. We can also take both the darker version and work that back in here, but we can also take the lighter version and do the same. So I can see that the light's dramatic here, which means that it'll be here. It'll kind of create a little bit of a bridge. We can go back in and add shadows later, should we want to. But I'm really just trying to get the feel down first. That makes some nice framing. And then there's a lot of light that works in here, but I do need the mid to darker green in first, and then this will be a darker green as a whole. So let's make this damp. Move this on over so it doesn't get too wet. Oh, I can hear something outside. I don't know what it is, but admittedly I'm a little disoriented. We're going to just keep on going and see what that ends up doing out there. But we do make this darker. I can see that it again moves in here. So I'll start that journey, trying to leave little openings where the ground is visible and seen. There we go. You can see it's pretty sporadic. And then we make it darker yet again. Lots of green gold. You can see quite a bit of it's drying on the palette. That's okay, but something we should be aware of. Now we'll just work a little bit of the shadow in here, into the bottom here, through there, and then all of this green will be a bit darker for the most part. You can see how this is very splattered aesthetically. That's what we're looking for. We want a real variance. We want it to look like it's always evolving and unique. And then back here we want it to be splattered, unique, but also darker for the most part across the board. You also have little bright areas, but they won't be this bright. And it'll be a level of staggered brightness. We'll make the very edge even darker, which means bumping up the Oxide Black in the mix. There we go. There we go. I like all of that a lot. Okay. So at this point, we should have a pretty messy painting, to be honest. That's okay. I'm going to try and move this over here just a little bit. Might open up some space to use. But now we switch back to the liner. I think I'll keep this in here just so it doesn't dry. You know, it kind of sounds like there's a lawnmower somewhere. But here's the thing. We're pretty high in the sky. We're in a Toronto condo. Realistically, a lawnmower would be extremely far away. So it's not that. I don't know if you can hear it, but to be honest, I kind of like the sound. And hear me out. When I was a kid, when I was growing up, I was always in and around large lawns. My dad loved his gardens. He loved having a big lawn. And every weekend he was out there mowing it, the neighbors doing the same thing. And there's just something that is so synonymous with Sundays and relaxing in my head with lawnmowers that I hear them and I kind of just go back to this place of being a kid, being pretty blissful. Honestly, a really nice set of memories and feelings there. So I know some people get annoyed when they hear a lawnmower because it can be a little loud, but for me at least, I always think of it as a nice little nostalgic trip. I think a lot of life's like that. You can look at things that are loud as disruptive, or you can look at them as exciting, or that which renders nice memories. Perspective, framing, it's so, so important. I think painting actually teaches us a lot of great perspective and framing, and that we're always meeting things we need to problem solve and troubleshoot, and then we do. And then we end up learning, we end up becoming better artists. Our work itself is better, but we only do that through having the mental fortitude to push on and to paint until it works, right? It's a lot of, I will just do the thing until I understand the thing, until I have a positive experience with the thing. And that's really what we're doing here. I have the vision. I know this will turn out well. I have faith. I can see it in my head. I've done something very similar before. Does it look great right now? No. No, it does not. But it will. And I know that. It is my hope that you too know that. You're going to stick it out and have faith in not only my painting, but your painting and the process. There we go. Okay. I like that. You know what? I don't think it is a lawnmower. I think it's a saw of some kind. And that too brings me back to being a kid, because yet again, my dad loved woodworking. There was a lot of that growing up. And I don't know, they're sounds that feel good, if that makes sense. I actually just did a woodworking class for my birthday, where I made these entryway key shelves, and that was so much fun. I think if you're somebody who likes to paint, you're probably somebody who likes to sculpt. If you're somebody who likes to paint and sculpt, you're probably somebody who likes to woodwork. I think, you know, at the end of the day, if you like working with your hands and making things, you probably like working with your hands and making things in a wide variety of mediums. So, just kind of cool. Now when I hear saws, again, I think of my dad, but I also think, oh, I wonder what type of saw that is. I wonder what I could do with that. What could I make? And that's fun. That said, this is looking really nice. We have a good base. We have some good land showing through. I think we need to go in with a much brighter pigment yet again. So I'm going to grab some additional green gold, because again, mine is starting to dry. We'll just work that onto the palette. In case I haven't shown this yet, we are using golden green gold. This is my favorite green gold. I actually don't love the brand golden. I think it's good. I think it's a good brand. And I wouldn't ever knock anybody for it. I just find I really like the colors of Winsor & Newton. I like the colors of Amsterdam. I like the sheens. But I will say nobody makes a green gold like golden. This is such an incredible green. And you know, every brand makes a green gold, but the golden one, beautiful. Really, really beautiful. That said, we are mixing up another very bright green. And because I need a lot of it, I might make it with our fan brush. Again, starting up here, working our way in over a lot of the shadows we've reintroduced. Idea is that the light's working its way through here. So we're just getting the corners and the edges of some of these, but it's pretty minute, pretty subtle. We're just going to build, 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 have some fun with it. Big steps aren't necessary through here. We're just slowly adding. I like that. I like that a lot. Now I think we make it even brighter. So I'm going to take the excess off. I'm going to make this almost a white. You can see it's almost a white in there. So I'm going to make it to the side of my green. Slowly just mix in a little bit of that green. That way it still has hue. But this will be fantastic. We're going to be very intentional with it. There we are. And now it feels like the light is very much streaming in, illuminating in a way that I had hoped it would initially. Just took some layers. Just took a lot of layers, but just took some layers. We're still just adding till we get what we want. There we go. Beautiful. I think as we get closer towards the foreground, I'm going to switch to the liner because I'm going to want to be much more meticulous in this area. And I talk about this in a lot of lessons where we have the fan brush on the liner. I think a lot of people ask which is better, and the answer is often both. We go in with both. We work with both. They work well in areas where the other doesn't, often. And it's the combo, the combination, that renders what we're really looking for. You can see I'm going in with a very soft tap of a very watery mix in between some of my other taps. That way there are very bright portions and there are slightly bright portions, and it's a lot of going back and forth. Then we can make some areas that are really sun-soaked much more thick with application, so you have less openings, less variance, like so. This is lovely. This is so much fun. I love working on these. And again, it's going to look a whole lot better as we continue. We're still just figuring out this area. Okay, after a little reflecting, I think I want more of this brighter, but not super bright green, in through this middle section, just to brighten up some of the mid values, some of the really dark values, and just make sure that it as a whole does look pretty sun-soaked. I don't want a large value discrepancy. Otherwise it won't look as bright as we want. We can go back in with more of the highlights. There we go. There we go. That looks nice. Now I'll use just the watery mix that I have left on my brush to go in and add a little bit of texture to the shadows on this side. I'm not looking to do a lot, I'm just looking to make it a bit more full looking, right? There we go. We can also add little blades of grass throughout. That's a nice little detail. We have these open areas, you can still see the ground. Might as well throw a little bit of that highlighted pigment vertically in. It'll move the eye up, it'll give you something else to look at. It's an easy bonus detail, and it's a nice one. Here you can see we're just going back in, adding more light. That's going to be a real part of this process. You add some, you ask yourself, is it enough? You take a little break, you go back, you look at it, you say, is it enough? You know, just a lot of back and forth with yourself till you get what you really want. That's pretty nice. Now, we have some larger trees. They have foliage on them. These are different things we need to account for. We have a lot of foliage on this side even. And this is more of a mid-green, so it's not super dark, it's not super light, it's more of kind of what we have in that center area. I think I want to apply that next, just because it plays a pretty big role in the painting. So we'll grab some titanium white, oxide black, green gold. Don't have to reinvent the wheel on this mix. Grab our fan brush, which is in fact pretty damp. There we go. You can see all of these trees right on this side. So we're going to just start interjecting little pieces of them. So it'll make more sense once we have this additional foliage. I feel like with these paintings I always have a lot of prefacing of, I promise it'll look good soon. Just trust the process, we will get there, we will. And that's just a lot of painting in general. That's just a lot of the fun. You can see I'm doing a lot of rotational taps. The rotations always happen in the air, but the more we do, the closer we get. Now this tree should probably have some foliage on it. I think this will actually be a pretty good mix. It is. We want foliage in front of and behind this tree. So this is some that's going to be both. We can go in and add more highlights a little bit later, but trying to make my applications a little randomized, pretty sparse in some areas, while much larger in others. I think that by itself did a lot. Now I think we brighten this mix slightly, a little bit of titanium white, that'll desaturate it, a little bit more green gold, that's perfect. Go back to this. Have a bit too much water on my brush. Again, we want it to be damp, but not too damp, not too wet. Now we'll just apply this to the edge. That will be receiving more light. Very good, very good. I like that. I like all of that. Let's go brighter. Not a lot brighter, but a little bit. We can't have the brightness here challenge the brightness here in any meaningful way right now. We could build up to it over time, but there's such a dramatic difference in what we have here versus what we have here that if we want to get to that, we need to stagger it. I think we'll also take this and we'll start applying it onto the right-hand side of these trees. You can work it over some of the branches. There we go. Some good bonus details in there. Back to the liner. Back to the highlight. There we are. We've got this. Doing beautiful work. Again, remember the majority of it needs to be on the right-hand side because that's where the light's coming from. But there will be occasional protrusions on the back half on the left-hand side that do also catch light. If you make it too bright, you can always go back and add a darker spot on top. But it is a lot easier to add light than it is to take it away. So do approach with some level of intentionality. It will make your painting job easier as a whole. There we go. I think we add a little bit of this highlight coming in from this side, implying that maybe there's another tree that's close to us over here. I like that. I like that a lot. Maybe we take some of it, again, intentionally work it over here. Intentionally being our key word of the painting. There we go. Lots of little tip taps. Beautiful. Really feels like this area is engulfed in light where this one isn't, and that's how it's meant to. I think we do need to continue to add more light through here. I don't typically mix with this brush, but I don't want too much paint right now, so this should be fine. I'm just going to make this look more and more full, which means I'm taking out the openings. When you take out the openings, you take out contrast, and when you take out contrast, you make things look more flat. But sometimes you need to do that for the sake of making it believable. Because in nature, sometimes the light is just so strong that it's consuming in this way. So I'm removing a lot of detail. But you can still see hints of it underneath because acrylics are semi-transparent. There we go. Okay. From here, I think we need to add in some of these bigger trees. I think that's a strong next step. So we're going to take this brush, wipe off the excess. Clean it up a little bit. It's okay if the green remains on because we do want some green in our mix. But now we are going to go to our burnt umber, said it correctly that time, our oxide black, titanium white. We'll mix up a nice dark mix and we're going to reincorporate this tree. You can again go back to the traceable up over on Patreon if you want to know the exact positioning. I feel like because I've drawn it a couple of times, I have a really good idea of exactly where this is going. But we put a lot of work into this painting so far. So when you apply this, make sure you're doing a very intentional job. Interjecting that intentionality, there we go again. Because, again, we worked really hard on this. We want to make sure that as we add in not the final subject, but these later ones, these very important ones, these ones in the foreground that are capturing our attention, that we do a good job, that they are where they should be, that they balance the composition well. We just want to make sure that we're trying our best. That is a great start. It's a little bit thin, as you can see. There's a lot of light that's showing through it. There's a lot of pigment that's showing through it. We're going to need to go over a lot of it again, trying to make the edges very nice and organic. So I'm making lots of little strokes rather than singular individual longer strokes. And I start with something a little smaller and then I make it bigger over time. I think that's a good size. We also have some over on this side. This one's a little higher. And it has a bend in it where it goes towards the right. I'm okay that it's semi-transparent towards the top because I like the fact that it looks like a lot of light is moving through it. It's also nice how it's smaller than this one. Now we have another one that starts here in the bush, and it does the opposite in that it curves the other way into this. Now I have a lot of pigment on my brush, so I'm going to take some of it off towards the bottom of this tree. And then I'll continue with this one up here, like so. And it has these little branches that work their way out. This brush is fantastic for all of this because it makes such sharp, intentional lines. But we can always switch to the medium-sized flat-headed brush if you feel like you want a little bit smaller markings or a little bit more control. Neither of which is incorrect, they are just more options. We'll also take some of this and work some trees up the side. They're quite noticeable in the reference photo over towards the right. So we'll start these off with the larger flat-headed brush, and then we'll switch on over to the liner for the details. The farther back your trees get, the more you can make larger elongated lines. They can look softer because in the distance they won't have as much detail, and you won't see all the intricacies in the bark and such. So you can actually get a little more lazy with the application. You still want to be intentional with it, but it can be more relaxed for sure. Now, I think we need, again, more thick pigment, especially towards the bottom of this one. I'm leaving in brush strokes so that it feels natural. Very good. I think now we switch on over to our liner for a little bit. Do some smaller branches. And these you can kind of freestyle a little bit. Trying to put less and less pressure as I move upwards, because your branches will just get smaller and smaller. That means you probably want to incorporate a decent amount of water into the mix, but you can't do too much, because if you do, you'll kind of have these dollops of water, then they'll make the marking actually bigger rather than smaller. So it'll be counterintuitive after a certain point. Again, I'm doing more layers towards the bottom to build that up. Make the top more opaque. going to do some wonky branches. So this one, rather than going up, it's just actually going to move towards the right-hand side. It's going to cut through here. It's going to have some little break-offs. Just trying to make unique movements so that we don't have the same branch twice. That's a really, really big part of this. Creating that diversity of branches. Here's one that can kind of come out from the middle, and we can have these tiny little protrusions, branches from the greenery. Right now things are so watery, it's more so just a lot of testing than it is actually plotting intentional subjects. I like that. Okay, so from here, I think what we're going to do is mix up a darker pigment for the side of our trees, the side that's opposite to the light. And that means Oxide Black, burnt Umber, a little bit of our green, a little bit of our titanium white. But again, the goal here is to render something darker than that which we have. And for the actual application, I am switching back to the liner. Now, we're going to go to the back of this tree, and, contrary to what I just said, because the light is moving in this way, not directly on the side, this darker pigment is being applied in the middle to the left. So the actual left-hand side is going to remain the original value we painted it, as is the right-hand side. So this is happening more so very close to that left-hand side, but it's not exactly there. We're going to let it run out as we get towards the top, and we're going to do lots of little taps and drags down here, because the goal is to make it look like bark. And it'll look like bark if it's comprised of a lot of minute markings. We'll apply it to the base of this one, and we'll work it up. Again, same rule in that it's not touching the left-hand side or the right-hand side. It's in the middle, but it's closer to the left-hand side. We'll make our mix a bit more watery. I think we'll actually make it a little brighter as we get higher up. I'm doing that with the liner brush because I don't want a lot of this pigment. Just enough, just a little bit. There we go. Bring that down. So far, so good. It's amazing how quickly this started to come together. I feel like just a few steps ago I was hard prefacing that it'll get there, yeah, surely. We just keep painting and it'll happen. And now it feels like it's happening pretty quickly. So good on us for sticking through it, getting to this point. Still quite a bit to do, which is fun, but I do feel like we're starting to see what it's meant to turn into. And that in itself is quite rewarding. Okay. Now we will go back and add foliage to a lot of it, but for now, I'm just building on those shadows. An area we are not going to incorporate them, and I say this with certainty, is these trees in the background. We want those to remain significantly more subtle. So we can incorporate this in a lot of places, just not there. I think the darker pigment will also work really well down here. This little branch. And then in lots of these bush-like areas, because they will have a wide number of branches that keep them together. We want these markings to be extremely small initially, and then you can make them bigger should you need to, but again, very minimal amounts of pressure in these beginning stages. You can move it out into the openings. That's always a nice move. And if you do too many of these, don't worry about it, because you can always just paint foliage over top of it at a later stage. So it's a really low risk application as far as the painting as a whole. Again, trying to move some into our light area, but I'm doing this once I start to run out of paint. That way even the branches in the light area is brighter. And then when it gets down into the shadows, we can make these darker, more noticeable applications. Remember that some of these can be diagonal, that they can have branches coming out of the branches. It's all very malleable. You can see that I'm jumping into the middle of a lot of these green clusters. It's slowly making it more realistic. Little branch by little branch. Some of them will be a bit bigger. I like to start by making them small, and then if it makes sense to make it bigger, then I do. Like that one and this one. I like those. I think we need a bigger one towards the bottom just to balance that out. Oh, we're doing great. We are doing great. Again, if we do too many, we just add more foliage in a later step, which I want to add anyway. It's not like we are even taking any extra time or any extra steps. We're just going to be doing things we were going to do, but we do it more intentionally in specific areas. Right now, I'm just kind of painting with feel and flow. Asking myself what areas feel incomplete. Here I might do a little taps into the ground, make it look like rocks and such. It's an extra texture, it's an extra little subject. It adds interest. Lots of little pieces. That's what it all is at the end of the day. There we go. I like that. Again, it really feels like the light's streaming through this side, which is the larger goal. I think these sides of the trees, the ones that are touching the light, I want those to be brighter. That's probably the next step. So we're going to make sure our brush is nice and clean for the most part. We'll grab a good amount of our titanium white, hint of our green for some warmth. Not too much though. Hint of our burnt sienna, so it's cohesive with the rest of our subject. Again, not a lot. That's a beautiful highlight. And then you can take this on the flat-headed brush if you want, and you can tap this onto the side of the tree. Very low pressure. Not trying to create a full hard line, I just want a speckling of light on it. I will add this to the tree in the background once I've started to run out of pigment. That way it's there, but it's more subtle. We'll add it to portions of this tree as well. This is something I probably should have done to this tree and the other one before I added foliage, but it's easy enough to work around, especially if we break out the liner brush. This is such an easy way of adding depth. There we are. Not done though, not done. I think we switch this on over to our liner brush for this tree because it is quite a bit smaller. Needs that intentionality. Just trying to build out those highlights naturally. You can tap in a couple in here. Just show that there are pieces of bark that'll stick out and catch light. Add a couple little highlights into this. Very good. All right. Can do a couple bright little branches and such sticking through in the same way we did the darker ones. Just here and there. Now we have our highlights, we have our shadows. We still need our actual foliage on the trees. So let's head back to our greens with our larger flat-headed brush. And we want to go with something probably mid-value like this, if not slightly brighter. So we're familiar with this mix for the most part. Need a little bit of Oxide Black, good amount of titanium white, fair portion of our green gold. And that right there is a nice mid-value on the brighter side. We have our forked fan brush. There's a lot of foliage up towards the top of this one. We want this to overlap our branches. There's also a good amount of foliage out here. I want it to go behind our tree to a point, so I'm going to purposefully avoid going in front of it for this portion, this little application. But then there are portions, like here, where I am actively going to go on top of our tree to show that this foliage is both in front of and behind it. There we go. Now we can do a little bit over here, not too much, just to show that it's coming down off this tree. Just a hint on top of it. I don't really see this in the reference photo, but I wanted to add it because I think it'll add a bonus level of realism to that part of the painting. I think I'm going to fill this area out now a little bit. Have some little pieces sticking out this side. That's nice. Now we switch on over to our liner brush. We do some intentional mark making. Just continue to build these out in the way that we know they'll look best. Though I think I actually really like what we got done with that last application. This is more so thickening and applying it over the wood in the intentional areas that we have. I've been very purposefully using the word intentional a lot, and something we used to do in the painting lessons, towards the very end of the very long paintings, I would always give you a kind of a secret word, something you could use in the comments to know that you were one of the, on average, 13% who makes it to the end of the video. And you know, I think these are very long videos, so it shows a lot of dedication to the craft, to the idea. If you make it this far, I think it's a good sign that you can do a great job with the painting. But if you did make it this far, for the sake of bringing that back, find a way to work the word intentionality into a comment that you'll leave here on YouTube, and I'll know that you are, again, one of the painters who did make it this far. Always used to be fun to keep track of who did and throughout all the lessons. Would love to start doing that again. So again, intentionality is the word. You can also just type it in the comments. You don't have to work it into a sentence, but I would love to see just who is really following along. That said, I think we're going to go with a brighter pigment from here. So we'll grab more titanium white, work that into our mix. Quite simple. Go back to our liner brush. Quite simple. Tap this onto the tops of the foliage that'll be receiving more light. Build out that depth. Create that variation. I think the tricky part here is not overdoing your applications and taps, because we just incorporated a lot of them. Chances are we applied the majority of the ones that we wanted to. So now we have to go in and add more while also not overdoing it. So I'm going to go over the ones that I have for the most part. I will create some new ones, but I'm trying to be very mindful. Grabbing paint off my brush. Off my mixing brush, that's always funny. Oh yeah, this looks great through here. Glad we're doing it. It's a little bit of extra effort, but I think it can go a long way. Especially because there's so much light down here, it makes sense that we would have some extra light up towards the top, right? That said, do be mindful of the shadows in the painting, because they will have a rather large impact as well. So far, this is great. Hope you're having fun. Hope you feel like you're learning. Hope you're feeling relaxed. I think we're doing great. Okay. Now, I think I actually want to brighten up this area just a little bit. I think the shadows will go this way. So this will still have a little bit more light. Yeah, that looks great. That looks even better. Maybe there's a little bit of light working its way through here, but just a little bit. Just a little bit through there. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, I'm gonna take a second to really look at this, take some steps back, and then we'll come back in and we'll figure out what we need to add from here. All right, so I took a couple minutes, stepped away, which is something I definitely recommend you doing often with your paintings, just so you can come back with a clean, fresh perspective. And there are quite a few things I would like to add. The first is additional highlights specifically on this tree's pieces of foliage, because I feel like these can kind of get lost, and it's okay if they get lost, but there are definitely portions that should stand out. And I think having them mixed will be ideal. So I'm just going to grab a little bit of my titanium white, a little bit of my green gold. I'm using the liner brush to mix because I do want just a very tiny, 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 tiny amount. And then I'm going to go back in and apply these highlights within this space. I want that area to stand out to a greater degree. And we do need some water to thin the pigment so I can get the sharper markings. Though we don't want to thin it too much, because remember, Acrylics are semi-transparent. The more water you have, the more transparent it will be. And then if you're trying to apply this highlight over darker areas, it just won't end up showing up. So it's about finding the balance, as is a lot of painting, right? I think I really like that. It's a little addition, but it's nice. I think we do a little bit over here, maybe just some sparking through this area. There's a lot of light up here that it can also be interjected in. And this is a good start. Now I might jump into this area briefly, just add a hint. And I'll be honest, I think that hint was all I wanted to do in that spot. Now, we'll make the brightest green we have yet. We'll come down to the bottom and we'll make the highlights on top of the highlights. So, nothing in the painting will rival this level of brightness. It'll give us an opportunity to fix up the base and the shapes that we have in there. Make sure that you really like that which you're producing. We can do a slightly more through here because it will work its way through there as a whole. Maybe a tiny spot towards the top. There we go. A lot more dimensionality, much more realistic. Might do some tiny little pieces of grass, but that's only once I've started to run out of paint and it's become more semi-transparent, because then those little pieces of grass won't be as bright. Again, the brightest areas right up here, no contest, nothing else should compete within that. We'll add a little bit more of our green now, a hint of our Oxide Black, because I want a bright green for the back here. I want something brighter than what I have. And you know what, I might actually take this mid value and work it down into this just to separate a little bit of our highlights. Again, you can add a lot of highlight, you can take away highlight, you can work back and forth. That's where a lot of the fun comes in. But I think we need a brighter mix. We'll try this. That is brighter. Try applying some of that highlight. Just make that stand out. Not a lot, but more than it is. A lot of the beauty in these paintings is going to be in the subtlety. So we go back and we add to build out that subtlety, without a doubt. Beautiful, 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 beautiful. We can have additional light towards the top because we're getting closer to the sky. So I will mix in extra titanium white into our mix as we get up here. Have it dissipate as we move down. So as I run out of paint, I will move down. Good, so far so good. That might be a little too much. Just scratch that off. Nice and easy. Might add a little bit of highlight to this bottom bush. I can tell in the reference photo that there is some in this area. I don't want too much, but I can tell that we can get some extra dimensionality. We just work a little bit through here. You can see it runs out towards the end. I like that. I like that a lot. Now, when I was stepping back, I realized that I also wanted some greenery over here, more of it, a darker green. So we're going to take our larger flat-headed brush, grab some of that green gold, Oxide Black. I'm going to start with just those two because I want this to be fairly rich because it's fairly close to the foreground. When we add in titanium white, we'll desaturate it, but I don't want this to be a real mix of oxide black and titanium white. I want the green to be prevalent in the final mix, and I think that's a nice balance. So we'll test it. Oh yeah, that's beautiful. Okay. Again, working from the side in. It's a little darker than what we were working with before, which is what we want. That's nice. Let's make it even darker. A little more oxide black. We're just slowly pushing it in that direction. Maybe a little more green gold. Keep that saturation alive. Oh, perfect. Perfect, 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 perfect. And now you can see how it works its way into the bottom. Shares values quite nicely. It just feels right. Passes the feel test, that's a big one. Now we're just working some shadows, some little dark leaves into the base. I like all of this. A couple more shadows in here just because again it's a little bit of a darker area as a whole. But that is working. That is working nicely. Maybe we switch on over to the liner brush. Make that nice and damp. Apply those little leaves intentionally. There we go. Gonna have a couple dark ones up here. Just break up the visual sameness of that area. Maybe a couple through here as well. Not too many. But the added contrast can be nice with restraint. Like that. Okay, you know what this is? The answer is far from over. Let's add another little branch. I feel like this space is starting to feel very full in the way that I wanted it to, very layered. Maybe we get a little bit more of that dark green. We could work in that area. A little bit here towards the base of a lot of these pieces of foliage. Just build out contrast. Not dramatically, but enough. Now, it's worth noting this will create shadow onto the ground. So I think, using the liner brush, I'm going to grab a little bit of my burnt umber, titanium white, a little bit of oxide black, hint of our green. Make it very watery. Light is coming this way, so right underneath it on the ground, I'm going to paint a shadow around a lot of the greenery to show that it is impacting the world around it. And then I'll softly blend the edges. This is one of those things where if you cover up portions of the ground, that's okay because you can always, or portions of the foliage, that's okay because you can always go back and rework it. I'll also take this same mix, say, okay, the light's coming through here, so all of the shadow from this will also be personally present right through here. There isn't a lot of ground though, so since there isn't ground, I think we go with a much darker green. Creating a line from where the sun is, bringing it to the base of my tree, and that'll give me the line for the shadow. Now, because it's in foliage, it'll be speckled rather than applied in the texture of the ground. That's the thing with a lot of shadows. You have to consider the subject it's reflecting or it's being cast on. Here, this one too. Again, creating that line, very similar to the last, except there's a little bit of an opening in between the two of them. There we go. Really simple, but a nice addition. We need to add that green over this as well. Create that line. So now we have the shadow in green and we have the shadow in brown. This is actually sticking out on top, over top of it, to the right. So it's not in the path of the shadow. So this can actually remain brighter, which is nice. Creates some more depth. Makes the shadow as a whole more interesting. Very good. And there's already a lot of shadow in here, but I am going to add just slightly more with the brown. We're getting towards that part of the painting where we're going back and we're fixing up pieces, which is always one of my favorites. I love when we get to that corrective stage. There we go. Now, back to the greens for that line. Soften it a little bit. Don't want it to be too harsh. And there are other little ones in the back. There we are. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so from here, I think I actually want a little bit more greenery towards the top. So we need this to be a light green, titanium white, green gold, right towards the top. Oh, that's beautiful, 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 beautiful. It just looks like it's glowing. And that's what we're really trying to achieve around the edges. We went back to this area a couple of times to try to do exactly that. Now I think we can double down on that idea. Especially now that we're farther into the painting. That's a big thing with art. You don't really know what you want your painting to look like until your painting's 85% done in a lot of cases, because your painting will change from the original idea that you had throughout the process, and therefore your vision of it towards the end changes. And sometimes you can kind of get lost on what that vision is. But I think often you get to that 85% mark and you have the bones of the painting, you have the idea of it, and it's about bringing those ideas to fruition, solidifying applications, ensuring that things are where they should be, and then you just start adding details. And the details are where a lot of the magic happens. I think the magic is there in the flow of the painting. I think it's there in the feeling of the painting, and I think it's there in the detail of the painting. And if you can nail those three things, then you're probably going to end up with a pretty wonderful painting. But this is what I'm having fun with. There we go. There we go. Now, we're adding these darker hues towards the top, which is creating a nice contrast between these two. I like that. But I think we have so much contrast between the light and the dark here. I want to add a little bit more light in this section. And to do that, I'm going to go in with a mid-value green. Oh, after I drop my brush and go and pick it up. You know, I don't know if there's been a painting lesson in a long time where I haven't dropped my brush at least once. So that's good. We're filling the quota. That said, we'll switch over to our large flathead brush. We'll make a good mid-value green. Means we're using a little bit of everything. Probably a closer to middle mix of everything. Not too much of one or the other. We'll grab our liner brush. Sometimes I use the green on the brush in the actual painting, so I'm going to keep that there. That way you have it as a reference. But we're just going to go in a little bit more mid-value into these sections because they are darker and they should be darker as a whole, but they should also still have dimension. Areas that pop up, protrude, catch light. They should have areas that are sharper. And that's really the goal of our current editions, you know? Not adding too much of it. Not trying to create the light that we have on the left-hand side on the right-hand side. Just trying to balance it out a little bit. I think we're doing a great job. There we are. Can even work this green up into this area a little bit. We can take that mid-value green, we can work it back over here, create more variance if we want to. I like that actually, create some good depth. Might even take it up towards the top to show more volume up here. Oh yeah, I like that too. Okay. Again, so far so good. Now I think we jump back into the highlights. Titanium white, green gold. Like so. And for the fourth time, I think, I'm going to re-interject highlight onto the sides of these. Continue to build that volume. We have a lot of highlight towards the bottom of the painting and here, and we're just trying to create enough of it in all of the quadrants that it feels really natural. We have this light ray that's coming through the forest. It can catch this branch towards the back here. And you often do want to find ways of justifying your highlights. It's typically not that difficult if you interject an extra little bit of light or an opening, but you want everything to make sense in the end. Somebody really looks at your painting and thinks about it. You want all of the shadows to be justified. You want all of the highlights to be justified. We don't just add them for the sake of aesthetic. We add them for the sake of conveying the space in a natural, realistic, but also aesthetic way. I think the longer you paint, the easier that gets. But it is a good thing to start thinking about now, because it does make a difference. Again, we have some light rays coming through here. They're catching the right-hand sides of a lot of these leaves. Doing a beautiful job of brightening them up. And I'm just slowly going back to these areas because we don't have a lot of contrast in this area of the painting, and you need areas of your painting that can breathe. So you don't want that much detail in every area. You don't want that much color in every area. The same goes for contrast value. but you want enough that it feels like it fits within the context of everything else. And therefore, highlight. Now, I'm just going to zoom in to this, take a little look at that area, take a little look through here. I like that. I really like all of it, to be honest. Okay. Let's add slightly more highlight up through here, maybe on this side. Just break it apart so it doesn't feel so chunky. I think that's another thing that we always have to actively work to avoid. Things looking too structured. When you paint with intentionality, often you render subjects with intentionality, and that can be great, but it can also sometimes look a little stiff. I know that's something I personally struggle with in painting. So I always try to go back and add as much movement, keep it free-flowing. It's easier if you start with it that way, but it is something that can kind of be reverse engineered a little bit too. So now we're just tapping on bonus little details where it makes sense. Again, there's going to be light that's working through here, so we'll tap that in. Have it dissipate as it comes towards the bottom. I think that's really nice. I think we can also add in some little rocks and such throughout the base. But I will admit, I think that right there is essentially what we're looking to do with our painting. So if you made it this far, big congratulations. Remember to use the word intentionality somewhere in the comments. That way I know that you are one of the dedicated artists who found their way to the end of the video. And if you'd like help with the drawing process, you can find that up over on Patreon. I sketched it all out. I also put the traceable up over on Patreon. And if you just really enjoyed this and you want to say thank you, give back to the channel, help these videos continue to be made, Patreon is the best way to support. So there's a link to that in the video description. I greatly appreciate absolutely everybody up there for making these happen. And I am going to continue making these. I think I want to do a little drawing series pretty soon too. Just because I think a lot of artists, a lot of painters sometimes skip the drawing step, and I think it's really important. That's why I do the traceables, that's why I do the drawing videos. I want to make sure that the foundation of your painting is correct. But I'd love to teach you how to draw too in a wider way. So I'm trying to figure out how those videos are going to look. And we'll continue doing the paintings. Continue just having fun making things. You know, at the end of the day, that's what life's about. Being exploratory, being creative, creating things that make people happy. You know, things that make us feel good. I hope this painting did that for you. Hope it put you in a good place. Hope it made you feel good. I think at this point, this is probably where we call the painting. So this is where I say a big thank you to you for being here, for supporting the channel, for watching along. I'd love to know what you would like to see me paint in the very near future, and what you'd like to see me sketch as well, because again, that is something I'm working on the idea of. Now, if you have any questions regarding the actual painting lesson, please leave them in the comments, and I will see you very soon with a brand new one. So, above all, as always, stay creative.